Happy Thursday and welcome to another weekly school-specific discussion on the MBA application process. I'm excited to be here with you today to expand our discussion beyond the M7 and T10s to also include UCLA Anderson, and we have a few more schools coming up in the next few weeks. So definitely encourage you to register for those if those are schools that are of interest to you, and you can join. Let's dive right into the UCLA Anderson application process. So let's start first and foremost with the UCLA Anderson's distinctive DNA. The candidates who come to us for UCLA Anderson support are definitely not confused about why they want an MBA. They're already high performers. They have a strong career trajectory. The real question is whether they can translate those achievements into what UCLA Anderson looks for in an applicant, which is collaboration, entrepreneurial drive, and measurable impact. Anderson's guiding principles are share success, think fearlessly, and drive change. And these are filters the admission committee uses to see who truly belongs at UCLA Anderson. On the surface, Anderson's essays and short answer look short and clear, but in reality, they test whether you can distill depth and direction into a concise and coherent essay in terms of the 3 essay questions that they ask. And so that's what we're going to unpack today: how to approach the Anderson's application with clarity and how to align with its cultural DNA, and also how to avoid some traps that are signals that may jeopardize your application. So Anderson's pool of applicants overlaps with the West Coast schools, so think Stanford, Berkeley, but also the M7s. You're competing against candidates with strong test scores, impressive brands, and global experiences. What breaks the tie here is definitely the ethos. Anderson prizes entrepreneurial spirit paired with collaboration. Leaders who can push bold ideas forward without leaving others behind are elements of what they seek to see in a candidate's application. And clarity of narrative matters more than being polished and sounding just like everyone else in the MBA application pool. I've seen applicants with perfect materials miss because they sounded very generic, but also I've seen non-traditional candidates win because their story was clear, it was cohesive, and authentically aligned with UCLA Anderson's values, but also their own individual value base. The Anderson AdCom screens for 3 consistent signals. First, collaborative leadership. They don't want solo operators. You think about you're in business school where everything is done collectively. They want people who thrive in teams, share success, and elevate those around them. Second, the entrepreneurial mind. This doesn't mean that you have to be an entrepreneur, so I just want to make sure that you are fully aware of that. It's really about fearlessness, your ability to think creatively, take ownership, and drive change, whether that's in finance, in consulting, healthcare, or entertainment, or any other field. And fearlessness is not that you don't have fear, it's that despite your fear, you keep moving forward. And third, context. Anderson leverages the LA ecosystem of tech, media, venture capital, and global commerce. They look for candidates who can not only benefit from that ecosystem, but also contribute to it in making it more diverse, more colorful, for lack of a better word. So the written Anderson section is compact, definitely, but strategic all at the same time. We've seen across schools that schools are shortening text to really try to essentially force applicants to be concise in their narrative and make sure that you have depth over verboseness. So first, you have 3 short answer essays that you have to respond to. So the first is, why is an MBA the right degree for you to pursue, both personally and professionally? In 150 words, you must connect your personal drivers with your professional context. So as you see here, it has to be a duality, both personal and professional, that you must bring into your goals. Second, what are your short and long-term post-MBA career goals? Also, in 150 words, you have to essentially communicate your goals. And if you are interested and a little bit confused of how to do this in 150 words, it's totally possible to do it. We've done it hundreds of times. But you can go to our YouTube after you watch this video and look for goals. How do you write an MBA goal? And that can be helpful in crafting your own if you're doing it yourself. But what I will say is you want to avoid fluff, and you have to really define goals that are ambitious yet credible. Third, why is UCLA Anderson a top choice for you, and how will you engage with and contribute to the community? At 250 words, this is the heart of where you talk about both what you will take and what you will give. This is where you provide that you really understand the UCLA Anderson DNA and can actively embody it. These 3 essays combined test your vision, your feasibility, and fit. If one of these doesn't necessarily or falls short, it does kind of impact the rest of your essays. So it's really important that cohesion across all 3 is paid close attention to as you draft your essays. So let's decode what these prompts are really measuring. So why an MBA is not an invitation for a boilerplate answer about leadership or global exposure or I want to explore or anything along those lines. It's about showing your clarity of trajectory, where you've been, where you're going, and why an MBA is the right level of degree that you need to take to move to the next step in your journey. The career goals question isn't about writing something impressive. It's about balance. Getting your goals that are ambitious enough to show vision, but grounded enough to be credible is really important in this process. And the Anderson fit piece is the most overlooked because, as you, I'm sure, have gone through your applications and school research, you start to realize that a lot of them sound very similar in their offering. So how do you differentiate? So typically applicants try to do this by listing clubs or citing rankings of the school and why this is like such an incredible opportunity. That's not really going to cut it. You need to demonstrate how your values and behaviors already align with the vision, the values of UCLA Anderson, which is share success, think fearlessly, and drive change. And how you will actively contribute to the UCLA Anderson's collaborative culture all has to be integrated in 250 words. The Anderson's 3 grounding principles that I just mentioned double down as both cultural anchors, but also as filters for the admission team to evaluate candidates. Share success is about collaboration and humility. Anderson wants people who elevate teams, who know how to win collectively. It's not just about whether you've succeeded on your own or you've stepped all over other people to succeed, but whether you've created success around you, because the collective goal is seen as much more valuable than individual success. Not to say that individual success is not important, but greatest success is always reached in collaboration. And then think fearlessly. This is where entrepreneurial mindset shows up. Not just, again, like I mentioned, not just being an entrepreneur. It's about your risk appetite, original thinking, and ownership of the work that you are doing. The ability to push boundaries in any industry, obviously in your industry that you're coming in from. So it doesn't have to be just in consulting, or it doesn't have to be just in, in the technology space. Whatever industry you're coming from, you have to own your work and showcase that you have that entrepreneurial, or maybe it's a better word, intrapreneurial lens, especially if you're not an entrepreneur. And then drive change. Anderson isn't really looking for dreamers alone. Dreaming is wonderful, but you need to be able to also execute. Applicants who can point to sustained, measurable impact are definitely going to make a good impression with the admission team. So did you leave an organization, a community, or a system better than you found it, is always the question that you should be asking yourself as you craft your resume, your essays, your experiences that you want to communicate in your entire application to Anderson. And that's really the proof that they have, is when you dive into your experiences and showcase how you've done these, how you've embodied these principles that make you a standout candidate. The other thing that it's important here is that many applicants actually overlook the Anderson's Park Career Management Center. This is not just a career services office. It's actually very, very structured and rigorous career support that helps applicants from day one. Students enter what can be considered essentially as a career boot camp. You work through a sequenced playbook, which means self-assessment, personal branding, resume, development, networking strategy, informational interviews, and mock interviews, all before recruiting even begins. And the power of Parker Center is that it doesn't leave career switchers to figure things out on their own. The process is definitely mandatory and hands-on, and designed to prepare you systematically to land offers in consulting, technology, entertainment, finance, and really any of the areas that you're interested in. Of course, that draws you to UCLA Anderson. Employers also know that Anderson grads are trained this way, which is why the school places consistently across high demanding fields. For admission, that means that they want candidates who will fully leverage the Parker Center. So these are opportunities that they offer, and they will walk you through the journey, but you have to be the person who does the walking. So it's really important that you are, while I support delusion a little bit, let's not be entirely delusional that someone's going to hand you a job. You have to do the walking. So if your story shows clarity of goals and track record and following structured processes and delivering results, these are all signals that indicate that you belong at the UCLA Anderson community, and you will be able to leverage all the opportunities that they have invested significant amount of capital and time to developing for you, essentially. So even strong applicants are going to fall into a few traps just because you overanalyze what you read on Reddit and blogs and all sorts of different things, because there's just so much information out there, and there's really no calibration of what's right and what's wrong. So the first thing to try to avoid is being generic. Safe essays. There's an element where you obviously have to, you don't want to, go too far in the esoteric lens, but you definitely want to be authentically you, but at the same time, a little bit of a risk taker, but still grounded in reality. Playing it too safe can make you forgettable, and Anderson wants authentic conviction, because that means that no matter the challenges that you will encounter, and you will encounter challenges, that that authentic conviction will carry you through and make sure that you overcome those. Second, over-engineering fit. I hear this, how am I going to game the system? It is not the right approach. If you feel like you don't belong there, don't try to game anything. Candidates sometimes write essays that sound like checklists, like, I'm going to write about clubs, I'm going to write about courses, I'm going to write about location. Sure, that's great, but it doesn't really communicate fit. Fit has to come through the lens of lived values and authentic connection, and how those connect with you on a personal level. Third, recommendations that only validate performance metrics. So if your recommenders only say you are effective at your job, you really miss the chance to showcase your leadership mindset, your collaboration, and your future potential. And this is why, when you make your selection of recommenders, it's so important, because if they're going to be the ones who are going to write you were effective at your job equivalent to, you have made a drastic mistake in your own decision-making process in your application, because they play a huge role in the decision for adcoms. So pay close attention to those details as you navigate this process. So at Sia Admissions, I talk about this all the time. We are really focused on helping applicants work through and present their experiences in an authentic way, but also that are aligned with the schools that they're applying to. For Anderson, that means clarifying your trajectory, personal and professional, and we dig past the surface level achievements to uncover through lines that prove readiness. So this means we have a lot of discussions about what those experiences have been, and along the way, you will have a much greater sense of what your value add is that you can talk about, but also you'll have much more confidence in your own story as you navigate the interview process and so on. We help you translate your impact into Anderson's guiding principles, so your story signals you are already embodying those guiding principles, essentially, that I mentioned earlier. And we aligned every asset from your resume, your recommenders, all of the languages that you, all the areas where you're using language to communicate your story. We are evaluating through the lens of the Anderson matrix and what they use in terms of evaluating candidate. So the admissions committee sees you not just as a qualified candidate who has strong academic background and strong test scores, but the right fit for the school that you can have, of course, highest ROI. So let's talk a little bit about some real cases of admits we've supported to gain admission to UCLA Anderson. First, I worked with an insurance and cybersecurity candidate. On paper, his stats definitely had red flags, so a 3.0 GPA paired with a career in a sector that's not really glamorous, to say the least. But what carried him wasn't really him trying to cover up his weaknesses. It was reframing his leadership. We highlighted how he mobilized teams, mentored juniors, and build trust in high-stakes cybersecurity environments. And that shared success, we emphasized how he anticipated threats and designed creative solutions, which talks about that thinking fearlessly. And then we showed the tangible impact of essentially more resilient client operations that he was able to support in navigating or in guiding his clients to build better infrastructures internally, which is what speaks to the driving change. The result for him was admission and a $70,000 scholarship. Second, I worked with an electrical engineer. He faced the opposite problem. He had strong technicals and academic profile, but he had quit his job before his applications so that he can focus on the application. So it's not really a legitimate reason to quit his job. The gap could have been definitely fatal, especially as a male engineer in an overrepresented pool. But we turned the narrative from unemployed to deliberately strategic, and we showed that stepping back reflected intentionality and definitely not a weakness. So we doubled down on his track record of innovation in real estate development and how he would channel that at Anderson and beyond. That alignment and how he will be leveraging the LA ecosystem of tech and infrastructure is also what landed him an offer with a $50,000 scholarship. And the third, this was a non-traditional healthcare candidate. She had left medical school after 1 year. A blemish, definitely, that she was very cognizant of and really stressed about. And what we did, we actually, before we go into that, she also was working in a small clinic, obviously no brand name, and we flipped the script. Her story became about community-centered leadership. We highlighted how she built systems of care for underserved patients, and how she created growth pathways for staff, and how she demonstrated resilience in pivoting from medicine to management. That essentially is what landed her an admission and a $60,000 scholarship. Across all three, the key was not pretending they were flawless. And if you pretend you are flawless, it's definitely going to backfire. The key was we translated who they are, rather, not we, who they were into UCLA Anderson's framework of the guiding principles, which is shared success, think fearlessly, and drive change. And that's how you turn a perceived liability into assets the outcome can value and understand. But definitely don't think that the admission team would be able to understand your story if you don't communicate it. So with that, we are going to move to questions. I encourage you to follow us on YouTube for all of our future live events so that you can get notified when these are happening. And even if you can't join us live, you will have that notification to remind you to go back to watch it in the future when you do have time. Also, you can join our MBA strategy circle, sorry, and where you'll get the, you can join the biweekly conversations that are private community conversations, and you can ask questions as you're navigating interviews, as you're navigating any components of your application. And if you want one-on-one coaching, whether that's on interview prep or essay development, or you want a full spectrum from A to Z, we can definitely support, and you can request a consultation for a one-on-one discussion about your background and how we can support you. But if you want just a profile evaluation, we also do offer free profile evaluations that are submitted through our profile evaluation request. You'll get a report from me that tells you essentially where your strengths and where your weaknesses are in your profile. Okay, let's dive into questions now. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to continue with questions that have come through our registration for this event. How do I make sure that my essays sound like they are for Anderson and not any other school? So there are components where, I mean, you have the third short answer question that is asking you specifically for Anderson, and making sure that you're communicating their values in there is going to be really integral in you speaking why Anderson is the right place. I suggest to all of you and for every school that you have conversations with students, you have conversations with admission representatives and alumni. Gather as much information and try to look at where the differentiating factors that are enticing to you, and that's, you know, the area that it's only true for you. And always think, because you're doing an MBA, this is not just getting a degree for getting a degree's sake, but rather it is this is a stepping stone for you to get to where you want to go, right? This is the opportunity for you to shorten the time frame between where you are and where you want to go with the help of an MBA. And when you're speaking to students, while it is great to hear about, you know, how you're spending your Fridays and weekends and what travel activities are you doing, those are great. However, it doesn't really tell you what does the experience look like and how does it prepare you for where you want to go. So be as concise in your conversations as possible in trying to understand what opportunities look like on campus that will enable you to have success. And that is then translated into your essays. You communicate that through in your material. Sometimes you name people, like Jane Doe told me XYZ. And sometimes you're just integrating it without necessarily naming the person that has given you that information. But the more authentic you are in your writing and the more introspective you are in your writing, the more authentic your experience is your communication is going to be, and the Anderson community is going to much more resonate with you when they read that response and your application. So I need your advice because I want to highlight my experience in the entertainment industry, but I worry it may feel like a cliche for Anderson applicants. I personally, like, UCLA Anderson is one of the top MBA programs for those who are looking to move into the entertainment space. So yes, there will be a cluster of people who are going to UCLA Anderson for that specific purpose. But you can highlight your experiences authentically. And if you're trying to stay in the entertainment, you communicate how UCLA Anderson is resources and career services consultants who are going to help you specifically in that space. But if you're looking to transition, you can still highlight the skills that the entertainment industry gave you that will enable you to make a pivot into something else that you're trying to do. And then look at specifically what UCLA Anderson has in terms of offerings for you to make that transition. If you can't find anything that they offer, then probably UCLA Anderson is not the school for you. So that's the ultimate question. Excellent. All right, I think we are done with today's. We're out of time. Next week, we are going to talk about Cornell Johnson's MBA program. So definitely register for that for September 25th, again at 10 a.m. as usual. Write your questions so that we can either integrate our integrate your questions into our presentation, or we can answer it just like this anonymously in the live. I look forward to seeing you next week, and good luck with wherever you are in the application journey.